This episode is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. Michelob Ultra is perfect for more than just the summer heat this year, because not only is it refreshing and crisp with only 95 calories, but Ultra is also the official beer sponsor of Team USA at the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Celebrate every point, race, and moment with Team USA and Michelob Ultra for the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Stock up on Michelob Ultra and cheer on Team USA. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2024 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Hey all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe, from character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods. We will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I am one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or She-Cup.
Yeah, and we're here with our part 2 of Tevinter Nights, which will be part 2 of 3. And so we're coming in with the next 5 short stories of Tevinter Nights. We're going in chapter order. So we're just keep going on.
Yeah, we are. So that means today we are talking about the chapters Hunger, Murder by Death Mages, The Streets of Minrathous, The Wigmaker Job, and Genitivi Dies in the end. So I have a lot of thoughts about these. I also really am excited for next week's episode 2. And I feel like I have a favorite chapter from each of these episodes, especially this, I already think you know which one is my favorite chapter for tonight's episode. But anyway, so let's just dive right in. We'll talk about all the things. So if you are just tuning into this episode and you haven't listened to last week's episode, I will give you just a really short overview of what this book is. So Tevinter Nights is a compilation of short stories edited by Chris Bain, Patrick Weeks, Matthew Goldman, and Christopher Morgan, published in 2020. Many of the characters that we meet in this anthology come up again as companions in Veilguard, characters in the Missing comic, and probably more that we don't know about yet. So with that, let's just dive right into the very first chapter, which is called Hunger. And this one is written by Brienne Batty, who also wrote the Streets of Minrathous chapter, which we will talk about in a little bit. Continuing our theme, I don't actually remember if we talked about this last week or not, but so many of these chapters, it's very funny that this book is called Tevinter Nights, because at least half of these chapters do not take place in Tevinter, and this is one of them. This one takes place in the Anderfells, specifically a small, remote, and cursed village named Eichweil. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, let me know. But in this chapter, basically what happens is Weishaupt has summoned all of the wardens back to their fortress, and Evka and Antoine are on their way there. They get delayed multiple times for several different reasons. When we first start the chapter, it's because they're fighting Darkspawn. But then it turns out that they've stumbled onto this cursed village, and the town has pretty much suffered from every single bad thing that could happen to you in Thedas. They have terrible weather. They've had their people go disappear. There's been murder. You name it. If it's a bad thing you can think of, it's happened in Eichweil. So Evka and Antoine decide to help them. More accurately, Antoine decides to help them, and Evka goes along with it. Their investigation, though, soon uncovers the truth that the town is actually cursed. Like, it's not just something people say, it's actually been cursed by a hunger demon who has been turning townspeople into werewolves. This occurred because a nobleman's son named Rank was ran out of town for poisoning a chantry brother, and they left him in the woods to die and starve. And so this person is kind of the first one that the hunger demon picks up on, and he is turned into the very first werewolf and has obviously been infecting all of the others. They hunt him down, but in the process, Antoine is bitten before they kill Rank. Ranka, I don't know. Anyway, however, because this man is the source of the curse, and as he is now dead, they're fine. Antoine does not turn into a werewolf. So there's a little boy that gets turned back into a human. The town is happy, etc. And they believe that they have killed the demon, and they continue on to Weishaupt. But it's at the end of the chapter, the very end, where the demon itself was not totally killed. That is the big reveal at the end. And in reality, the demon has only been banished and is lying in wait for its next victim. So currently, Eichweil is not cursed, but it probably will be again soon.
The town with the worst luck.
Truly. So main characters in this one are Antoine and Evka, and then there are just several villagers that don't really, to me, in my opinion, they don't really stand out individually. They very much blend in as like one character, like the townspeople are their own entity.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And like the townspeople are their own entity. Just like general reflections before we get into some lore stuff about this. This is now, because this is an anthology collection of short stories, this is now the third short story that has Antoine and Evka in it, correct?
Yes, because we have two that got released with Dragon Age Day, various years. So you're right. They have now appeared 3 times.
Well, as the old rabbi saying goes, once is coincidence, 2 times is happenstance, but 3 times is an act of God, or gods, if you will.
Or the maker, if you will.
Yes. I really think that maybe there'll be at least like codex mentions, like we'll find some like recap of where they are since they've been just so prevalent and a large number of these short stories, and a lot of these short stories characters, as we guessed, ended up being companions. So I really like Antoine and Edka. I really like Antoine's kind of like, especially in this, I think we get more of his like, they say he's like happy-go-lucky and jokey, but I think it's more of like a like nihilistic, like, hey, my life sucked. So, you don't laugh. If you don't laugh, you cry kind of humor.
I do think he has that kind of humor, but I also think he's eternally optimistic. Like, and this was actually something I wanted to bring up because there's a quote about his character that I think is really important. And it happens on page 183. And so basically it's during the fight, and or she thinks she's about to get taken out. And so she's like going on to attack this last werewolf. And this is what the book says. Wait, Antoine yelled, throwing himself between the dwarf and the werewolf. What are you? This one never charged. That doesn't. The werewolf fell back to its knees and whimpered, help. The word came out like a choke, as if formed by cords not meant for speech. And so after that, Antoine like goes and talks to the werewolf, helps him, and it turns out he's the little boy that got turned into the werewolf, and so he's afraid. And Evka, Evka, I don't necessarily think she's doing anything wrong in this situation. She's doing her job as a warden to eliminate the threat. But Antoine takes it a step further and puts his humanity or his, he's not a human, he's an elf. But he puts like the thing that makes him a person, his empathy, into the forefront. And I think that it's a really needed skill in Grey Wardens because he's like the antithesis of Genevieve, right? Where everything is about the cause of the wardens. Everything is about stopping the blight, and we don't care about the cost. We don't care who dies. And Antoine is very much taking the opposite stance of, no, we have to care about these people. We have to care about the people that are in front of us. And if that means that's to the detriment of our job, then so be it.
Yeah. And I really like that. And I would love to see, like, I wouldn't be surprised if we get into like the Veilguard, and in the Warden Origins or just throughout the game, we find like similar, like, competing factions have risen up within the Order of the Wardens. Like a faction that kind of is probably more old guard-ish, like we have to do everything we can to stop the blight, like any means necessary means any means necessary. And then I could see this like new faction with like Antoine and all these and other people, probably the Hawk sibling if they're a warden, coming up and saying like, no, we can't forget the people that we're supposed to protect.
Yeah, and I very much agree with you on that. I do think it's actually more traditionally old guard of the Grey Wardens to be concerned with the people. But in the way that it has happened and been laid out in Inquisition, sure. But anyway, something else I wanted to bring up to kind of prove what we're saying here is this exchange that happens between Antoine and Evka after the fight on page 187. And Evka is basically talking about what is going to happen to Willem, the little kid. We don't know, whatever. And Antoine says, "We aren't there yet," Antoine said. His fingers twitched at his side as if he were counting something. More plans, more ideas of how this might end. Wardens don't save everyone. No, but we try. She took a deep breath. Are you a liability? It wasn't that she didn't trust him. He had stood at her back. But that wasn't the point. The hurt on his face twisted at her, and of all the heroic warden traits he tried to embody, she wished that he had included the Order's fabled stoicism. We need to save Willem, he said, pacing away and then back again. He won't be the only one at risk if we're not careful. If you don't want me to, I don't want you to die. And so they go on. But I feel like this exchange is so telling because Evka is very much concerned with the mission, right? And Antoine is concerned with helping the people. And they may have the same outcomes, but they are two different standpoints to begin from. And I think you're right completely that this is something the Grey Wardens are going to have to wrestle with. And I think it's a big theme in this chapter.
Yeah. And then just before we get into the big thing, which I know is like what everyone defaults to, which has to do with this curse and the werewolves and all of that. Just a small thing that Antoine, there's little bits of what I assume is like the Orlesian language in this book. Antoine says it a lot.
Well, he's going to be the only one who speaks any Orlesian because Evka is a dwarf from Orzammar, so she wouldn't know it.
Right. If you on mine, it's page 165, and it's like near the beginning of when they're battling the shriek. Antoine says "Désolé," and then it like thinks sorry.
Yes, you're right. I remember this now. And he speaks it later at the end of the chapter, but it's really just French. Like I took a year of French, so I know a modicum. But I'm pretty sure désolé just means sorry in French. And then at the end, he says something like bien sûr, on y va. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I put that into a Google Translate and it kind of is like, okay, let's go. So Orlesian is just France, like not even any kind of intermediary, like let's make it a little different. It's similar to how later on, I don't remember if this happens in the Wigmaker Job or in an Old Crow's Old Tricks, but in one of the two, they say it's in the Wigmaker Job. I remember now. He says "sí" all the time, like yes, yes, which is obviously, as we know, Spanish. So,
Well, yeah, and I remember
anyway.
because I remember they actually talk about a like a town dish from Antiva. Like a
Cacio
real
e
life.
Pepe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, you're right. You're right. Anyway, right now we're not talking about the Wigmaker Job. Right now we're talking about hunger. The last thing I have to say about this chapter is obviously the big thing is werewolves, right? I don't think we've seen werewolves since Dragon Age Origins. So that's a big thing. I honestly think, I know there are so many people out there talking about how, oh, Veilguard's going to be so different from Origins, but I actually think just given everything that we've seen leading up to it, especially with the content of Tevinter Nights, I think Veilguard might be more like Origins than any other game.
You heard it here, folks. So if it's not, come after She Cup.
I mean, sure, come after me, but I'm not going to take your shit, so that's fine. Anyway, so let's talk about ratings, unless you had anything else to say.
I was just going to say, it's interesting to see the like repeat of the curse. I think is really interesting. Just because like, and it's like so similar because like the curse is tied to a person, just like it is with Zathrian. Like it is obviously like the same kind of thing going on. So it was a really nice callback. I would give this story definitely a 4.5. I'm only taking off half a rating because they mentioned Wysop and we didn't get to go there, and I really want to go to Wysop.
Wow. Okay. We have vastly different ratings because I gave it a 3. This is, I think, by far my least favorite chapter so far. I just don't particularly care. I don't dislike Antoine and Evka. I just feel like I don't know them well enough to care about why they're stopping to help a little random village in the Anderfels. That's just me personally. And I do love the Wardens. Don't get me wrong. I want to know more about the big picture of the Wardens, not necessarily the little gritty info, which you will probably never hear me say ever again. Like, I'm always the one that's like, I want to know about the little guy. I want to know about the nobody and what they were doing in history, not what like the people in power were doing. But with the Grey Wardens, that is just not where I'm at.
So I also think like, is this chapter kind of colored for you because two of your favorite characters in all of Dragon Age, one is in Luck in the Garden and the other is in the next story in the death by Murder by Death Mages?
Okay. We're going to move on to Murder by Death Mages. First of all, Cassandra is barely in this story, like at all. And I don't know who you're referring to as my other second favorite character. If you're talking about Lucanus or Brother Genitivi. Oh, Dorian. Yeah, Dorian.
From Luck in the Garden.
Yeah. I got you now. I don't know. It may be a little bit. I don't know. I think it's something about Antoine and Evka because I don't particularly care for their short stories outside of Tevinter Nights either, which is weird because I love the Wardens. So I think I just want to know more, and I wish that there was more about their backstories in these short stories. I feel like we get more about the other characters' backstories in the other chapters than we do about them.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to Murder by Death Mages. And this one was written by Caitlin Sullivan Kelly. And the setting is Navarra City. So again, we're not in Tevinter. But in summary, Sidoni is sent by Cassandra Pentagast to investigate and end a Mortalitasi plot to assassinate a member of the Navarran line of succession. Sidoni is an agent of the Inquisition, but to me, I think it's unclear if this story occurs during or after the events of Dragon Age Inquisition. I know a lot of people say, oh, this happens during Inquisition. I don't know if we can make that assumption fully. I think that there is the high likelihood that this could happen in the time after Inquisition and before Trespasser during the time of Trespasser or even in that short period of time right after Trespasser, but before the Inquisition is like fully disbanded or made into a peacekeeping arm of Divine Victoria. So there's that. But anyway, Sidoni does not want to take on this mission because she wants nothing to do with Navarra nor the Mortalitasi. And she actually vowed that she would never even have anything to do with them ever. But Cassandra needs her, the Inquisition sends her, and so she goes regardless. And she soon realizes that her former mentor and father figure, Lord Henrik, was the one who tipped off the Inquisition. And subsequently, he's the one that's been murdered. So she meets with Antonia, a friend of Henrik's, who wants to help. Antonia sends Sidoni to a party hosted by Nicholas Reinhardt. At the party, Sidoni meets Siros, an elf who's been accepted by the Navarran elites. Siros tells her that the Mortalitasi have already killed 4 nobles in the past week, all of which have been passed off as accidents. Yet another noble is found dead moments later in the estate. The story comes to a head when Nicholas Reinhardt's wife is murdered, and Sidoni and Siros are found standing over the body by Nicholas himself. He reveals that he's the one who hired Siros to assassinate all of his political rivals and to pin them on the Mortalitasi. But in the ensuing confusion, Siros and Reinhardt are both killed. Later on, at Henrik's funeral, Sidoni confronts Antonia and figures out that she's the one who killed Henrik and Reinhardt's wife. Sidoni then kills Antonia for murdering Henrik. So there's a lot of murder in this one, which you could probably imagine by the title, Murder by Death Mage. But there's a lot of murder in this one. And so the main characters are Sidoni, Cassandra, Antonia, Siros, and Nicholas. So what are your thoughts on this one, Austin?
I enjoyed this one for a lot of reasons, but I'm normally not a thriller or like a big fan of the whodunit stories, but this like little murder mystery thing that's going on, I just find really interesting. And I liked Siros as a character. Obviously, he had his own flaw, but I liked this elf that seems to know all the secrets about the Navarran nobility. I just really appreciated that. But before we get into it, I just really want to read this paragraph from the start that is just classic. Later, Pentagast, bearing her usual grave expression, had summoned Sidoni to the Inquisition's war room with a simple order: return to Navarra City and put an end to the Mortalitasi plot, quietly and before further intervention was required.
This, to me, the paragraph you've read and just after it does very much highlight Sidoni's character, because it goes on to say Sidoni had protested. There are other people there are other Navarrans in the Inquisition, send one of them. Who else is going to stand up to Cassandra Pentagast? So it's very much like, okay, well, Sidoni clearly has a backbone to stand up to Cassandra. So there's that.
Is probably why Cassandra trusts them to do this.
I think that's very fair. Very, very fair. But something else I'm kind of been reflecting on, and I know that generally as a fandom, we've discussed this, but I don't think it really dawned on me until I reread this how German coded Navarra really is. And yes, sure, we've been talking about that, but especially with the names like Reinhardt, Henrik, Emmerich, Manfred, like these are all very, very German names. I don't necessarily think that that's brand new or off the wall. I just think that they're leaning into it a little bit more, especially since the publication of this book. I don't think the vibes were that strong in Inquisition. Not that we even really got that much information about Navarra anyway. But I do think that that's something they're leaning into a little bit more, which I'm excited to see. I honestly have been so excited to see Navarra because they are so different from the rest of Thedas. And I hope that they continue to kind of like lean into the German vibes. So it's not just like, oh, medieval European fantasy world, like let's make it really distinct and different from the other places we've seen.
It gives very, hold on, I gotta get the actual Carolingian Empire, which is like what we think of. I had to look it up because I've been practicing saying it because we're going to talk about it on Assassin's Creed this week in the episode. So I've been practicing being able to say it. It's very much that vibe of that Holy Roman Empire, Germanic states, like these vibes, but even just right down to like all of these nobles even having like little kingdoms in it of itself, so of like their power and their maneuverability, which reminds me very much of like the 1500s German princes and their relationship to what would be Rome or the Chantry in this case it's very similar in this historical time. And I appreciate that attention to detail.
I agree with you. And I think, honestly, one of the places where this comes into play the most is with names, which I know we've already mentioned about this chapter, and I've been reading ahead in the book, and there are some chapters later on that are set in Tevinter, and I'm just like, these names are so Roman. And so I think we see that in multiple places, honestly. And I think, again, you can say the same about the Antivan names too. Like, this is very Spanish, so Italian, both. So I think you're right. I think there's been a lot of attention to detail in these stories, and that's it is impressive. So, do you have other things to say about Murder by Death Mages, or are we good to give our ratings and move on?
I think I'm good. With this rating, I think I would give this story again a solid 4. I'm not a big fan of like the genre that this short story is written in, but I enjoyed it. So 4.
So I also would say that this is a 4 for me, which I'm sure Austin and all of our listeners are like, oh my God, this had Cassandra in it and Shelby's not rating it a 5. First of all, I can be objective. Secondly, I don't necessarily dislike the genre, as you have said. I think the reason it didn't get a full 5 stars for me is because I definitely felt like Sidoni got a little bit lost in the plot. I feel like it was very plot heavy and not as much character driven. And, Dragon Age they excel when they are character driven. And so I wish that there was a little bit more of Sidoni's explanations for why she viewed Navarra in certain ways. And like, yes, sure, we get like, okay, she doesn't have parents. Henrik raised her, but he like wasn't really a true father to her. Like, she was more his ward. And so, there's a lot of that there, but we didn't really get more about like, why did she join the Inquisition? How did she come to Orlais Ferelden? All of these kinds of questions about her backstory. I just wanted more. And I understand part of it is that like there is a limited page count that we can deal with here. I get it. But I also think that we can make the character a little bit more meaningful. So that's why it didn't get a full 5 stars for me. But I do think the look into Navarra, excellent. Some really interesting characters here for sure, though.
Good story. Well written, well crafted.
All right. Well, I think it's time to go to our mid-break.
What is this? A new book? All this shit is weird. Oh, Varric, that is a terrible title. What are you even thinking?
That book you were reading this morning, Assyrian Spear. I don't think he had a spear in the legends.
He does in this one. Read the description.
Andraste knelt before no man but her maker. But she hadn't counted on the Archon Hessarian. Can Hessarian penetrate the tight-knit defenses of the warrior prophetess? Will she be prepared to face the full blast of his power? Wait a minute. Isabella, this is a vulgar thing.
You want to borrow it?
No!
You sure? It has pictures.
Not listening, I'm not listening.
Varric, does Hawk ever autograph books?
Why? Doesn't your copy of The Tale of the Champion have a big hole in it?
Yes, but it could also have Hawk's signature on it.
Well, welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to talk about all things going on with the podcast that don't have to do with the lore of Dragon Age. And so it's here where we thank our patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons, especially our first patrons, Lisa, M, and Genesis. And a special thank you to our newest patron, Cameron D. Thank you for signing up, joining us here on Patreon. Another great way to support us if you can't support us on Patreon is to leave us a rating or review on Apple or Spotify. If you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we will read it out on a future episode of the show. And so this review comes from Apple from Buck in the Wild, and it says, great coverage of the Dragon Age universe. Learn something new every episode, even after reading all the books and playing all the games. Thank you so much for that review. And if you'd like to review us too, we'll read it out on a future episode of the show if you leave us 5 stars and some kind words. Lastly, you can come hang out with us on Discord, talk about the Veilguard, talk about all things Dragon Age, share your pets, hang out on the internet. It's the best place to be. You can join that Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. That link is on our website, cupspodcasting.com. It is in the episode description. It is in every episode description. So there are lots of places that we can find that. And that's all I really have for the mid-break.
All right, let's get back into it.
The past years have been so busy. We have earned at least a few moments of rest. A calm night out sounds... Oh, bravo! Bravo! Was the woman in gold playing a king? Who was the man in feathers? Oh, it's all very simple. The first actor's mask is determined by... well, I will lend you the program guide. But tell me, did you enjoy the performance? That was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Truly. That part with the glittery, and they actually set fire to... Yes, I truly enjoyed it. Then I call tonight a great success.
I've got some of it written down now.
Give it here. Her breasts strained against the leather jerkin like 2 wild stallions corralled against their will. She pounced, the smooth moves of a jungle cat, and locked her thighs around Donnick's waist. He...
What?
Nothing. What is that?
Isabella just thought she'd celebrate your love affair with a written dedication.
It's friend fiction. I do it out of love.
I will never, ever be clean again.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
Okay, so this is where it gets juicy. Second half of the show. These next 3 are excellent. So the first one we're going to look at is The Streets of Minrathous, and this one's written by Brienne Batty. And of course, the setting is Minrathous. So we said in the first episode, there are a lot of chapters where we get companions, and this is one of them. So in this story, private investigator Nev Gallus stumbles onto yet another Venatori plot while she is working for Otho Calla, a prestigious magister. Otho's nephew, Quentin, is suspected of being in on the plot, at least until he's stabbed to death by an unknown blood mage and member of the Venatori. Nev soon learns that another suspected Venatori, Lady Verantis, was murdered the same night as Quentin. These 2 are not the only suspected Venatori who have been murdered. In fact, they soon learn that the murderer is a woman named Elia, and she is after a clay disc that all of the victims had in their possession. Despite all that they have learned, Knight Captain Jarvis closed the investigation into Lady Verantis' murder at the behest of their family. Nev continues investigating anyway, and soon gets her hands on her own disc, which is when Elia attacks her. She escapes, but Elia does steal the disc. However, Nev doesn't give up. She goes to the Templars to convince them to join her, especially as she follows after the Venatori, whom she has discovered are about to free a very powerful demon that is sealed under Minrathous and is said to be so powerful that only a god could summon it. The clay discs are actually what is sealing the demon in its prison. Nev arrives in the catacombs and attacks the Venatori alone. Then the Templars come to join her, Savas, Javis, and Brahm. Together, they all prevent Elia from completing the ritual, take her into Templar custody, and keep the demon in its prison. So the main characters are Nev, Savas, Javis, Brahm, and Elia. So what are your thoughts about this one, Austin?
I just want to get this out of the way. There were moments of this story that kind of took me out of immersion, but that's not really the writing's fault, and is more the fact that I'm thinking about Brahm from the inheritance cycle and how that man would not go within 10 feet of the Templar Order.
That's fair. I do wonder if the author is a fan of the Aragon books.
They're the only two places I've seen the name.
Yeah, I don't know. I was going to say one thing. I know we mentioned, obviously, the main character is Nev, but we got a lot more information about her. If you haven't read this, I really recommend it because, she's from Tevinter. We know that, right? We knew that going in. However, I don't really think you fully understand where she's coming from in Tevinter until you read this chapter. She lives in a place called Docktown, and this is not like high and mighty Tevinter. This is not where Dorian lives. This is not a fancy estate. Yes, she is a mage, but she's not a powerful one. She very much is a working class person, or at least that's how it's presented so far in Tevinter Nights. She counts her pennies. She gets her dinner from like a market guy, like selling fried fish. Like, this is not a elevated person. This is not a person who has immense power in her society. This is just an everyday kind of person. Like, if she lived in Kirkwall, she would not be living in the nice part. Like, she would be living in Lowtown. Like, that's where we're at here. And I think from her appearance alone, I would have assumed, oh, she's probably like a magister. She's probably, pretty elevated in society. And that is not the case.
Which makes sense, like, now that we know that, like, she comes into, like, reading this chapter and learning about Nev's backstory and everything is like, of course she ends up joining the Shadow Dragons. Like, of course. Like, it makes sense.
Well, and I also think, I'm not sure we can say that she joins them, because I think the likelihood that she might be a founding member is possibly pretty high.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I liked Nev, and there's a lot of, like, lore implications here. Also, it was nice to see that the Tevinter Templars are not entirely useless.
Well, when they get bribed, they definitely are. So I want to talk about the demon. Because I have a theory. And I know last time I said I had a theory, people agreed with me. But I do wonder, this demon is so powerful, right? What other really powerful demons have we seen before? Zebenkek, Imshale. Could this demon be the fourth and final one of their order, the formless one? Could this demon have gotten released between the Streets of Minrathous and Dragon Age the Veilguard, and we have to come and take it down?
It's possible. It would be interesting because, like, Zevenkek, Gax Kang, Imshale, like, you can beat those games without ever encountering any of them. Like, I don't know how you would level up if you didn't go through at least to unlock the fortress in the Emprise, but you can. It's possible. If they're gonna do the fourth one, I think they'll do it through like a optional side quest. It is interesting, and just the lore of like only that a god could summon. The play on like that these stories have used, and when they use like, oh, this was like a god, and especially like mentioning the elven gods, because in across the short stories, the horror and like in the horrors of Harmach, any portrayal of the elven gods that we've gotten, the regret of a god, everything else, they've not been good things. Like, these have not been things that were like, oh, look at these pretty elven gods that are just happy-go-lucky and we're great people. No, they're monstrous.
I mean, I think that the god that was supposed to summon this demon is Corypheus. So that's not a good thing either,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's highly possible that this is one of the last forbidden ones, especially since all of the other ones, except for Imshale, have to be summoned through a very specific ritual. Like you have to do the tomes in Dragon Age 2 in a very specific way to even encounter Zebin Connect. And then there's a whole like dungeon and ritual that gets you to Gaxkang in Origins. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this is the same one. It's very similar.
It is. It's very similar. I think it also bears some similarities, just to get away from my theory for a little bit. I think it bears some similarities to the demon from Luck in the Gardens. And I also think it bears some similarities to an old god. You know, it's locked away in a prison. So I think there are a few different options and opportunities that they could pursue with this story.
Yeah.
The only other thing I wanted to mention is I find this story interesting just because of the author. Brienne Batty's other stories include Hunger, which we just talked about, the next one, and Won't Know When. And all three of those follow Grey Wardens Antoine and Evka. And then we have this story that is so vastly different. It's honestly impressive. I really enjoyed this one a lot more than the other ones. So I just kind of am curious, like, does she just really love Antoine and Evka? Like, which story did she enjoy? Did she enjoy writing more? You know, I just have a lot of questions, but I think that is a little bit, it's something to be called out.
Right. She's not the writer of Nev.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think we have that information yet.
Other than like we know Mary Kirby wrote all the Varric stuff that's in there.
Yeah, I think she also wrote Lucanus. Like, we have a few things that we know of just because writers have said things on the internet, but not because like, oh, it's beneficial. And, you know, we should also say, like, we talk about, oh, so-and-so wrote this character all the time. But in reality, and some of the devs have been talking about this on Blue Sky especially, it is a team experience. Like, it is a group thing. Like, one developer does not have sole custody over one character. Even if they were the primary writer on them, other people played a part. So that is important to mention too.
And that's true across the board in all like entertainment media. Like if you on a TV like script, like the team of writers, they might assign an episode to a specific writer, and that writer gets the credit in the like credits and writer's credit for that episode. They just like, in a lot of ways, they'll write a skeleton script, and then the other writers will come in and be like, oh, no, it would be really funny if this character said this, or this is more poignant if this happens this way. And then it changes and it's a group effort.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we don't have anything else to say about this one, we can go on to our ratings.
It's a solid 4 again, just for I love the demon stuff and all of that. I have found that a lot of these stories, except for the one we're about to talk about after this one, have been very like slow on the like opening exposition, have been slow in getting me to like, okay, now I'm ready to get in there.
Yeah, like the action takes a little bit to build up to, which for me, I enjoy that. I like that, which is probably why I've rated this a 5. But you're right, they do have more exposition and more world building. And I do think that maybe makes them blend together a little bit. But the next one that we're going to talk about is not that way. So let's just dive right in. So the next one is The Wigmaker Job. And this one was written by Courtney Woods, and I am so excited to talk about this one. This one is set in Virantium, which is a city in Tevinter, but not Minrathous. Lucanus and Ilario de Amorte took an anonymous contract to assassinate Ambrose Forfex, Tevinter's most prestigious wigmaker. He also happens to be a Venatori blood mage. Forfex hosts a party showing off of his wigs, and Ilario and Lucanus infiltrate the villa. Ilario distracts the lead guard by flirting with her and stealing her keys. Lucanus takes the keys and infiltrates the downstairs where Forfex's workshop is. Lucanus takes down almost all of the guards very easily, and they come into contact with one of Forfex's slaves, who admits that all of the slaves hate him and want the De Amortes to kill him. Lucanus promises to help her, and Ilario is like super annoyed by this because he's even mad that Lucanus didn't kill her because she's seen their faces. So they're very much trying to stay anonymous. But they enter the workshop regardless, and they see rows and rows of sedated slaves who are chained to the ceiling, catatonic, and wearing Forfex's wigs. Forfex is in the back, feeding red lyrium to the slaves and using the red lyrium to power the wigs. The De Amortes, they've kind of snuck in through the side door almost, and they allow Forfex to leave the room before Lucanus frees all of the mages and then destroys the lyrium-based chandelier cage thing that's on top, on the ceiling. The destruction of this cage causes the veil to basically completely fail at the villa entirely because it was already very thin. This means that chaos and demons simultaneously erupt at the party. The slave models quickly become possessed. They're possessed first because of the red lyrium. And the drunkest and most frightened guests also get possessed by demons. While Ilario gets the slaves out of the mansion, Lucanus takes on Forfex, who has turned into an arachnid-like abomination. Lucanus kills Forfex, and approximately 40 or so of Forfex's guests are also killed at the party. After this, Lucanus becomes known in Tevinter as the Demon. At the end, Lucanus and Ilario meet back up at a bar called the Nug Queen, where they discuss their grandmother, the first Talon, Caterina de Amorte, as well as their roles in the Antivan Crows organization. Lucanus insists that Ilario will become the heir because Lucanus is too valuable in the field. The chapter then ends with a group of Tevinters promising to hunt Lucanus down.
So I feel like I am legally required to talk about this, which is
Go
that
ahead.
the Antivan Crows and the assassins from Assassin's Creed are very, very similar. Though I would argue that the Assassin's Brotherhood is a lot more moral than the Antivan Crows, but they both have AC as their initials. So Shelby pointed that out to me today.
They do. And I agree with you on your point. I do think the assassins from Assassin's Creed have a much stricter moral code. I don't think the Antivan Crows have any moral code. In fact, Lucanus's morality of freeing these slaves is abnormal. But I do think that we are seeing big Assassin's Creed vibes in multiple stories about the Antivan Crows. As We Fly by Lucas Christensen, this one, The Wigmaker Job, and Old Crows, Old Tricks, several of these stories are leaning into the Assassin's Creed vibes. And I think that that's intentional. I do think it's a little bit of a shift from, I think the last time we really got a look at the Antivan Crows is in Origins. And I don't get those vibes as much, whether that's because this is a newer thing they're leaning into or, they just ran out of time or whatever. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I do think that they're leaning into the Assassin's Creed vibes a little bit more heavily.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The conversation that Lucanus and Ilario have about the slaves, and then again about Ilario's also mad at Lucanus when the demons get out there, and he's like, well, this is not what we were supposed to do. It very much reminded me of the relationship between Ezio and Machiavelli.
As meaning that Ilario is Machiavelli and Lucanus is Ezio.
Yes, which also tracks because of one of your last points about Lucanus's facial hair.
True. We'll talk about that in a minute.
But it's very interesting, and I wonder, the two things that I have about this is that this is now like the second or third time, again, that number 3, that we have seen Tevinter Magisters messing with red lyrium in particular. So I'm thinking of this story, the Blu-ray Mage Killer comics, and then there's another one that I think is later, maybe in this book. And, we have the whole thing of absolutions ending with Knight Commander Meredith and all of that Red Lyrium kind of going on, which really makes me nervous for the state of Thetis, because Red Lyrium is not like, even Solus is like, no, I'm not going to mess with Red Lyrium.
Yeah. I mean, it is very destructive. And I think it's possible that we could see a Tevinter that's overrun by Red Lyrium very easily.
And like just the destruction that we see like in the Emprise alone is just really, really frightening with all of that. But it makes me wonder if this anonymous contact who has hired the crows to assassinate this person is some way either related to the Shadow Dragons, or perhaps related if it's Fenris himself who has hired them to take out this person.
See, I feel like Fenris would just do it.
Yeah, I would agree with that point too. But I could see him being like, I need to go take down this, but this also needs to be taken down. You know, he would have met the crows when Hawk meets Zevran, so he would have had some knowledge to be like, well, let me incorporate them.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything's possible at this point in time, but anybody can hire the crows. So it truly could be anyone at this point. But I do want to talk about some themes. And I think one big theme in this story is about reputation. It's very clear that the crows already have a reputation, and not just the crows, but Lucanus and Ilario, especially Lucanus, already have a reputation. And I just want to read a little bit. This happens on page 264 if you're following along. And this happens before Lucanus and Ilario even come into the picture. And a woman named Felicia Aramond, sister of Livius Aramond from Inquisition, has gone to Ambrose and is like trying to warn him that the crows are coming. And this is what it says. The man who's taken the contract is no ordinary crow, Felicia explained, careful to keep her voice steady. Ambrose uncorked the wine with a wave of his hand and began pouring it into a crystal decanter. He's Lucanus de Amorte. The bottle clanged against the crystal. A crack splintered down the glass. Ah. Goosebumps pebbled the wigmaker's neck. He set the decanter back on the counter and sighed. Shit. So this reputation is already clear. Lucanus already has a reputation for killing Tevinters, and the actions that occur in this make his reputation that much bigger. And we already know he gets a nickname at the end of this, the Demon. So his reputation is sky high, which makes sense as to the Wake short story, why they've killed him. But that kind of leads me into my next point about there's a fun little exchange between Ilario and Lucanus where they're talking about, you know, keeping a low profile or not keeping a low profile rather. And Lucanus basically says, oh, well, I'll just grow a beard and it'll be fine. What does he have in the Veilguard? A beard. So a fun little touch there.
Because of the, you know, Lucanus's Wake short story, faking a death would not be difficult for an anti-Vin crow.
No, I don't think faking a death would be difficult for anyone in Thetis. It's not like they have social media. It's not like they have biometric anything, fingerprints. They don't have that kind of stuff. Like, we're not in Mass Effect here.
It's very, very easy for him to do that. So I fully expect to be like, hey, him, like when we meet him in the Veilguard, him just being like, yeah, I died once. It was no big deal.
For sure. Another thing that I want to go back to with the Assassin's Creed vibes. So on page like 266, 267 or so, there's just an interesting little tidbit here. This is before they even go to the villa, Forfex's villa. They're still at the like tavern hotel thing before they go there. And there's somebody that's trying to sneak up on them. And this is what it says. Ilario's pretty boy mask slipped as a coldness flooded his features. A retractable dagger shot out from under his sleeve. What does that remind you of? What does that remind you of? A hidden blade. I think I screamed when I read that. Like, oh my God, this is a direct Assassin's Creed reference. It feels like to me.
I don't know if they're going to do like a full like retractable hidden blade, but I could see something similar of like storing a blade in the wrist that projects out for a quick delivery to make a quick assassination kind of thing. I could see that a lot. These stories make me want to like have actual stealth mechanics in the Veilguard of like actual sneaking and takedowns and other things like that. And I hope that we get stuff like that.
I agree completely. And I know that I have said multiple times that I am so torn on which faction I'm going to choose when Veilguard finally comes out. But I think that rereading Tevinter Nights has completely solidified for me that I am choosing Antivan Crows. I have always loved the Crows. Every time I've played Origins, I've become a Crow there too. So I think that that's where I'm going.
This has solidified the Wardens for me too. I think we're actually the same on this. This one's a 5 for me. Perfectly well written. Suspense is there. The action moves quick. I think the dialogue is well written. 5 out of 5.
Yeah. If I could give this more than 5, I would. Like 10 out of 10. So good. I loved this one. There's so many good things I could go on and on about this one. This one's probably my favorite. I have a couple that are in the running for number 1 favorite of all time in this book, which we'll talk about in the 3rd episode, but this one is for sure in the running. Oh, last thing I wanted to mention before we get into it. There's a new swear in Thetis, everybody. Andraste's holy cabbage. You heard it here first.
Last
I'm
one.
ready. This is the last one. So this next one, which is our last one that we're covering for today, is called Genitivi Dies in the End, and it was written by Lucas Christensen. The setting is a little bit all over the place. It occurs mostly in the Silent Plains, and then also in Ravane is where the narration is from. By special commission of the Inquisition's Inner Circle, Filium, a bard, ! Brother Genitivi, Matteo, a Lord of Fortune, and formerly Sister Laudine are sent on a journey to the Silent Plains to discover the true history of the Evanuris. They're sent there because they heard of an elven library that fell, air quotes, into the deep roads when Arlathan fell, air quotes. However, they admit that they've also discovered that it was not Tevinter that caused Arlathan to fall, but rather the Evanuris themselves. The story continues as a retelling of what's happened. The bards argue about what to portray in the story. While they are in the library, the Antom arrive, led by a woman named Rasan, who is searching for the true name of Fen'Harel, the Dread Wolf Solus. Rasan then interrogates each of the bards about their real names. We learn that Filium is a Trevelyan, Genitivi is dedicated to the Maker, even above his accolades, and Sister Laudine is a Sarabasalitan, or, in other words, a mage to be feared. She then attacks, which allows the group to escape. Rasan chases them across the Silent Plains, catching up to them until Sister Laudine uses her magic to collapse a section of the Imperial Highway, which also leaves Laudine tranquil. Filium and Genitivi have been mortally wounded by arrows, and Matteo is the sole survivor and eventually sends their report to Varric Tethras. However, in reality, this story is not the truth. Filium, Genitivi, and Laudine are not dead, nor is Laudine tranquil, but they are in hiding from Rasan in Ravane. They eventually decide to keep writing about the elven gods and warnings about Rasan under pseudonyms.
I do agree with what you've written down as your third point is like, this is probably the most objectively, this is the most fun chapter. Like, it's full of humor, it's full of commentary. A lot of like very similar to like how Varric tells the story of the champion to Cassandra of like, we're telling the story and then there's like interjections of be like, wait, what? No.
Okay, 2 things. I have 2 things to say. Number 1, the word jaunt, G-A-U-N-T. People say that was a fun little jaunt. That word was made for this chapter. Number 2, if you have ever had to explain to someone what an unreliable narrator is, just have them read this chapter instead, and that will commit it to their knowledge.
Right. Like, I have read the chapter. It's a quick read, though I had to read it, like, I had to read parts of it twice. And I even read the summary again, and I'm still, like, Okay, what actually happened?
And I don't think we know. I mean, I think that, okay, yes, they went to this part of the Silent Plains to find this elven ruin in the midst of the deep roads, and the Cunari showed up. Like, I think we can say that much is true. But is Sister Laudine really secretly a mage? Obviously, I don't think Genitivi Filium are actually dead. Who knows? Maybe they are. I don't know. I guess they could have died subsequently, but there's so much of this that we don't know if it's true or not. I think I wrote in my notes, what of this, if any, is the truth?
It reads very much like you would expect, like, the tale of the champion to read.
That's interesting. See, I think it reads back in olden days when newspapers were still a thing. A lot of times books and authors, they would publish their next chapter in the newspaper. You see this in Little Women. This is what that reminds me of. Like the next chapter that people are like talking about, like, oh my God, have you read this? Similar even to Lady Whistledown in Bridgerton. It's like, oh my God, like they want people to talk about this. It's dramatic. It's dramatized even. So I think that that's it's a fun place to start, because the rest of it up to this point, we're not thinking about it like, oh, who's the narrator in this? Are they reliable? Maybe Luck in the Gardens, since that one's narrated in first person. But this one is the first one that I've really been like, okay, are these people telling the truth?
I definitely agree.
The answer is no.
Yeah. But I think it's really funny that, like, in this thing, like, they're not sending this report to the Chantry. They're not sending this report to the Inquisitor. They're not sending this report to whatever. It's going to Varric.
Right. Right. Well, and I think it's so funny because, like, 50% of the people on this are like affiliated with the Chantry, but they're sending it to Like, it's just funny. But I do think that there are some lore points in this, like Genitivi goes to this elven ruin and he's like, oh my God, my entire life is a lie, which he probably would do if he's alive in Veilguard to, meet Elgernon and Gillenon.
And I think this very much reads like, I'm surprised, like, we didn't get mention of, like, the Frostback Basin DLC stuff. Like, I feel like Genitivi would, like, if Professor Ketherick published his findings that the Inquisitor Emeridin was not only an elf, but in fact a mage.
Yeah.
It would have been like Genitivi been like, oh, now I have to, revise all my history books. And
well, I mean, I think he does do that, but I do feel like Genitivi is much more focused on the religiosity and the theology of it rather than the history of it. But when you first started bringing up the Frostbacks, I was like, but that is mentioned. But that DLC is not mentioned. What is mentioned is Genitivi's interactions with the party in Origins in the Frostback Mountains. So I just want to read this because I love it. It's kind of like after they've escaped, or after they're fleeing, more accurately. They're writing the report going on, and this happens on page 315. So this is what it says. It makes no sense, said Genitivi. That is not how Cunari behave. You have experience, said Filium. You would be surprised. Genitivi managed a chuckle despite the circumstances. So just a little exchange of like, well, you would be surprised. Like, obviously he's referring to Sten. And this is not the first time that we'll get reference to Sten and the Cunari in this book. So for those of you who have been wanting to see Sten come into Veilguard, if we get 2 references in this book, I think that there is a pretty high likelihood that we'll see some reference to him later on.
I agree with that.
So the only other thing 2 other things I wanted to talk about with this chapter is, number 1, Rasan. So if you haven't read the comics, you might think that this is her first appearance. This is not her first appearance. She also appears in the Dragon Age comic, Those Who Speak, and she very much has the same kind of grievances and same goals. Like, she is preoccupied with name. She wants Isabella to reveal her true name. So this is something that we've seen for a long time with Rasan. I think that's significant. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, which is my favorite part of the story, and this happens at the very end. So they were talking about the Randy Dowager at the beginning of the story, and the Randy Dowager comes back up. And this is the exchange that the bards have. But we continue, he said. Write our warnings as someone else then? For a time, Philium shrugged. That Rasan will chase us, said Laudine, and her strange and Tom. I'd rather change my name than have her take it. Easy for you to say. I have decades more with mine. We can have other names, said Philium. Becoming other people is kind of the job. Yeah, but it was such a good name, said Genitivi, gesturing with flair. Ferdinand Genitivi. Philium rolled his eyes over to Laudine. I told you we should have brought the Dowager. Well, said Genitivi, perhaps her rates can be discussed, he winked. Philium's quill and jaw both dropped. As you said, child, we can have other names. Another history revised. So, Brother Genitivi is the Randy Dowager, which is my favorite lore fact of all time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's just so funny that this like super academic, like probably like studied an intro to like Chantry Theology 101. Like it's probably like every like Chantry scholar or whatever talks about, oh yeah, when I started, I had to read Brother Genitivi or whatever. Also writes this gossip column.
Yes. Like it's my favorite thing. Truly my favorite thing. It's scandalous. Like it is it is gossip, true. And I know we mentioned Lady Whistledown from Bridgerton earlier, but that's essentially the Randy Dowager is Lady Whistledown of Thetis. So you can see why this is so shocking that this staid, academic, religious, uptight man is the author of it. It's even more shocking than Dan being Gossip Girl. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Well, this one's actually fun and an outcome that we enjoy.
That's fair. Fuck Dan Humphries. Anyway, we're completely off topic tonight. I think that we are good to give our ratings on this one. So what is yours, Austin?
This is a 5 for me. It was fun. It was a good story. It had a lot of like twists and turns and other things like that. It was confusing, but it wasn't confusing in a way that paid off.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction. I think a lot of times, sometimes stories are confusing and then you never get unconfused. For me, I did finally figure it out, even if you have to read it multiple times. So this is also easily a 5 for me. So many fun moments, so many like callbacks to old lore, just excellently done. So I think that leads us into our overarching ratings of these 5 characters. So I have totaled mine up already. So just to review, Hunger is a 3, Murder by Death Mage 4, Streets of Minrathous 5, Wigmaker Job 5, and Genitivi Dies in the End also 5, which gives me an average of 4.4.
So for me, Hunger was a 4.5, Murder by Death Mages is a 4, Streets of Minrathous is a 4, Wigmaker is a 5, and Genitivi Dies in the End is also a 5, which gives me a total rating of 4.5.
So we evened out by the end of it.
We did.
All right. Just to wrap this episode up really quickly, are there any themes that you've noticed across all 5 of these chapters, or even all 10 so far, or just any other lore reflections, thoughts that you may have?
I think these 5 chapters, I know we just divided them up via order, but I think these 5 chapters actually all kind of touch on the theme of don't take things at face value. I think that's a big theme across all of these stories. I think the one that maybe not touch on that is the Wigmaker, but there's so many like twists and turns and like bad things happening at that. I think that like you don't take it at face value because I think, oh, we're just going to go assassinate this Wigmaker. Well, in fact, is like actually very dangerous.
Very complicated. I think the role of truth is a major theme in several of these chapters and in the ones coming next too. And similarly, corruption and reputation are two additional themes. I know we talked about reputation with the Wigmaker Job, but this chapter with Genitivi also touches on reputation, and I think the other three, and I would also say hunger touches on reputation a little bit too. And just being set in Tevinter, I think they all kind of evoke conversations of corruption because Tevinter is deeply corrupted. So those are three that I'm really noticing. But unless you have anything else, I think we're good to wrap it up.
I do not. Well, this is enjoyable. Keep walking out. We'll have part 3 of Tevinter Nights. And then we will have, after next week's, we will have, what, Last Flight is up next?
Actually, we are going to do the missing before we do Last Flight. So we're kind of having a Veilguard unit here. All the things you need to prep for Veilguard.
Right. So we'll hit up the missing, but the end of Tevinter Nights is going to be our next episode. Thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Do you love Dragon Age? Have you always wanted to learn more about its vast world and detailed lore? Are you still attached to your hero of Ferelden, even a decade after Dragon Age Origins came out? Or maybe you're a newer fan, still discovering a new tidbit or quest every day.
Well, either way, the Dragon Age Lorecast is the podcast for you. I'm Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm Shelby, also known as Shecup.
And come and join us as we embark on a journey to explore and discover all things Dragon Age.
We'll discuss all kinds of topics, from Lyrium to the Chantry and the great mysteries of the old gods, and even more that even you BioWare superfans might not know about.
So come and listen on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. And always remember,
swooping